The wind swept across the desolate Utah valleys in early 1859, carrying with it the scent of sage and the cold, dry dust of the high desert. In these remote settlements, life was shaped by faith, labor, and the unyielding hand of nature. Yet, beneath the surface of ordinary routines, children tending livestock, women baking bread, men tending to their fields, lurked a quiet tension, one that would soon unravel into a mystery that no neighbor could ignore. The missing secret wives had begun to disappear, one by one, leaving behind only whispers, cold hearths, and questions that no one dared to ask aloud. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. One wife failed to return from the communal gathering, where she had gone to share provisions. Her husband, a respected figure in the settlement, claimed she had wandered off, distracted by errands or chores. But the neighbors noticed a pattern emerging, subtle at first, then undeniable. Women who had once been visible pillars of domestic life, baking, cleaning, tending children, were no longer present. Their absence left empty rooms, unfinished meals, and a cold hush that settled over homes like a fog. The air itself seemed to carry a tension, a silent warning that the ordinary world could not contain the hidden truths simmering beneath. Among the missing was Eliza, a young woman whose marriage had been kept secret even from most of her own neighbors. She was known for her quiet resilience, her ability to move unnoticed through the rugged landscape, and her unassuming intelligence. When she vanished, the settlement felt the weight of her absence immediately. Her children wandered through the house calling her name, the echoes swallowed by wooden walls and the cold morning air. The fireplace, once warm with the scent of morning bread, stood cold. No trace remained beyond faint footprints in the dust. Outside the back door, disappearing as mysteriously as she had. The case of Eliza drew the attention of the local community in a way no other disappearance had. Men who had long maintained multiple households faced scrutiny. Questions that had previously been whispered behind closed doors now echoed openly across the streets. The air was thick with suspicion, yet no accusation could be spoken without risk. Every glance at a neighbor's window, every sound of movement at night, became a potential clue. The very structure of the settlement, the small, isolated homesteads surrounded by open plains and rocky cliffs, turned ordinary routines into tense surveillance. Eyes followed every step, ears strained to catch every word. Reports began to accumulate of other secret wives disappearing under equally mysterious circumstances. Some vanished while performing everyday tasks, collecting water from the river, tending to animals, or visiting the market. Others seemed to disappear from within the walls of their own homes. There were accounts of faint noises in the night, footsteps that did not belong, doors left ajar when they had been carefully secured. Children whispered of shadows moving along hallways, of faces glimpsed briefly in moonlight before vanishing entirely. Neighbors dared not investigate alone. Even the most courageous approached cautiously, aware that whatever force had claimed the missing women could easily remain invisible to any observer. The psychological tension in the settlements was immediate and pervasive. Families became wary of outsiders and neighbors alike. Parents instructed children to remain inside after dusk, even as winter's chill crept into homes. Conversations were hushed, eyes flicked toward every doorway and window, and the quiet of the night seemed louder than ever. The fear was not just of the unknown, it was of the known, of the possibility that those entrusted with care, guidance, or authority might conceal dark truths. Husbands, particularly those with more than one wife, faced unspoken fear from their neighbors and an inward pressure to maintain the fragile veneer of propriety. The ordinary acts of daily life, preparing meals, tending livestock, drawing water, were imbued with a subtle, almost cinematic tension, as if any misstep might unravel the carefully held secrets of the community. Even the landscape itself contributed to the unnerving atmosphere. Narrow canyons and rocky outcrops provided places where a person could vanish entirely from view. Isolated cabins hidden behind sagebrush and rugged terrain created opportunities for concealment or captivity. The high desert, vast and silent, amplified every sound: the cracking of a branch, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant call of a lone animal. It was a stage set for a drama of absence and fear, where the mundane act of walking from one homestead to another could carry unforeseen peril. The physical isolation mirrored the social isolation of the women themselves, invisible, vulnerable, and at the mercy of those who knew how to navigate secrecy. By the end of the first few months, the missing secret wives had become more than a series of disappearances. They had become symbols of the tension between authority and autonomy, secrecy and transparency, fear and trust. The settlements were alive with speculation, a careful dance of observation and silence. The question on everyone's lips was not merely where the women had gone, but why no one dared to speak openly about the circumstances that allowed them to vanish. Even those who had remained invisible, the wives who had yet to be discovered, felt the shifting currents of fear and anticipation that marked the boundaries of daily life. This opening chapter in the dark history of 1859 Utah sets the stage for a story that is both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because the setting is a frontier settlement with daily routines of labor, worship, and domestic care. Extraordinary because beneath these routines lies a labyrinth of secrecy, coercion, and fear, a world in which women could disappear, families could fracture, and communities could be haunted, not by specters, but by absence itself. As we begin to explore the social, cultural, and historical context behind these events, it becomes clear that the missing secret wives are not merely historical curiosities. They are windows into the psychological, moral, and social dimensions of life in a society that balanced faith, authority, and secrecy with terrifying consequences. In 1859, the Utah Territory was a landscape of stark contrasts, where sweeping plains and rugged mountains met the ambitious efforts of settlers seeking to establish communities guided by faith and survival. Life in these settlements was dictated by the rhythms of labor, the cycles of seasons, and the rigid social structures dictated by religious and cultural norms. The majority of settlers were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who had migrated westward in search of religious autonomy, fleeing persecution in the eastern United States. These communities were characterized by a mixture of hope, discipline, and deep social cohesion. But beneath the surface lay complex systems of authority, gender roles, and secrecy that would shape daily life in profound ways. Family units in these settlements were central to both social stability and spiritual life. Men often held multiple responsibilities, managing labor, finances, and spiritual guidance, while women oversaw domestic tasks, education of children, and maintenance of households. In some cases, polygamy was practiced as part of religious belief, though the exact arrangements were often deliberately concealed from outsiders and sometimes from even members of the community. These secret marriages, sanctioned in private ceremonies and rarely recorded publicly, created a dual layer of social reality: the visible, orderly life of the settlement and the hidden, complicated web of relationships and obligations beneath it. The missing secret wives phenomenon emerged directly from this tension, illustrating the consequences of secrecy and authority in an isolated frontier society. Geography played a critical role in shaping the lives of settlers and their ability to hide or protect sensitive matters. Homes were often widely spaced, separated by rocky terrain, sagebrush, and high desert valleys. Travel between settlements could take hours, and visibility was limited by both natural obstacles and the practical design of homesteads that emphasized privacy. This isolation created opportunities for both protection and concealment. Women could be hidden in distant cabins, in secluded rooms within their husbands' homes, or in areas deliberately off-limits to general community access. The rugged landscape also heightened the psychological tension. With few neighbors nearby, any disappearance could remain unnoticed for hours, and the same isolation intensified both the fear of intrusion and the anxiety over unknown movements in the environment. Economically, life was arduous. Settlers relied on subsistence farming, livestock raising, and bartering within tight-knit networks. Harsh winters, limited water resources, and unpredictable weather compounded the difficulty of survival. Men and women alike engaged in labor-intensive routines, often rising before dawn and working until after dusk. Domestic chores were physically demanding, and the construction of homes, barns, and irrigation systems required coordination and cooperation. Within this context, the control of movement, particularly of women involved in secret marriages, was both a practical and a social mechanism. Those managing multiple households or hidden spouses balanced labor obligations with the necessity of maintaining secrecy, creating environments where absence could easily be concealed or orchestrated. Religious structures and community oversight also deeply influenced daily life. Church leaders wielded considerable authority, guiding moral behavior, mediating disputes, and directing social activities. Religious instruction was intertwined with civic expectations, and obedience to leaders was seen as both a spiritual and practical necessity. Women in particular were subject to moral and social scrutiny, expected to maintain decorum, virtue, and loyalty within the confines of prescribed roles. The missing secret wives were caught at the intersection of personal agency and social expectation, where compliance could ensure safety, yet secrecy and concealment could also become dangerous when authority, gossip, or fear intervened. Social interaction was further mediated by the communication limitations of the era. Letters, brief visits, and church gatherings were the primary means of maintaining relationships. News of absences or unusual behavior traveled slowly, often colored by interpretation and rumor. Within the settlements, gossip acted as both social control and a mechanism for collective vigilance. A missing wife could spark concern, suspicion, and investigations, but the same mechanisms could suppress disclosure if a man or family held sufficient social influence. Power dynamics within the community were subtle yet potent, determining who could speak, who could be believed, and who remained hidden in the margins of social awareness. Education and literacy, while valued, were often secondary to labor and survival. Women might teach children to read and write, pass down religious knowledge, and instill moral guidance, yet their voices were often constrained in public spheres. Men were more likely to engage with broader civic concerns or to participate in community decision-making. This disparity reinforced the visibility of some individuals and the invisibility of others, particularly women involved in secret marriages. When a wife went missing, her absence carried more than personal consequence. It challenged the social assumptions of visibility, role, and authority within the settlement, creating anxiety that rippled far beyond the household. Health and medical understanding also shaped life in the settlements. Limited access to formal medical care meant that many ailments were addressed with folk remedies, practical labor adjustments, or religious rituals. Women, who were often the primary caregivers, had to manage childbirth, illness, and injury with minimal resources. Confinement, secrecy, and the psychological burden of hidden marriages could exacerbate physical or mental health conditions. Episodes of fainting, stress-induced illness, or sudden disappearance were interpreted through a combination of moral, spiritual, and rudimentary medical frameworks. The community's responses to such events were therefore informed as much by belief systems as by observable evidence, creating fertile ground for misinterpretation, fear, and prolonged anxiety. Cultural norms of the time reinforced hierarchy, obedience, and the preservation of communal order. Secrecy, while risky, was embedded in everyday life as a necessary tool to navigate the complex moral and social terrain. The disappearance of a secret wife could evoke scandal if discovered, but concealment was often tolerated or even expected to maintain public stability. These dynamics created a tension between individual safety, moral obligation, and social visibility, which is crucial to understanding the context of the missing secret wives. What may appear today as mysterious or alarming was, within the framework of the settlements, an extension of survival, faith, and the maintenance of social cohesion. Finally, the political and legal context must be considered. Utah in 1859 was a territory under federal oversight, but heavily influenced by local religious authority. Legal enforcement was limited, and disputes often relied on community mediation. Polygamy, while religiously sanctioned within certain groups, was technically illegal under U.S. law, creating an additional layer of secrecy and risk. Families who practiced multiple marriages or concealed spouses had to navigate the ever-present possibility of investigation, moral censure, or legal consequence. This duality, faithful practice versus legal prohibition, added tension to daily life, making absence, secrecy, and concealment a recurring theme in the lived experience of the settlements. In some, the Utah settlements of 1859 were shaped by a delicate balance of geography, religion, labor, gender roles, and social cohesion. Hidden marriages, social surveillance, and the ever-present demands of survival created conditions in which disappearances could occur and be concealed, and where fear, rumor, and suspicion became integral to the rhythm of life. It is against this backdrop that the missing secret wives emerged, their stories illustrating the intersection of human vulnerability, authority, and secrecy in a community striving to survive and maintain moral and social order in a harsh and isolating frontier landscape. The first disappearance occurred on a frost-bitten morning when Martha, a young wife whose existence had been known to only a handful of neighbors, failed to appear for the morning chores. Her husband, a burly man accustomed to the rhythms of frontier life, reported her missing after searching the house and barns. The neighbors, initially skeptical, began to notice signs of disturbance. Footprints leading from the kitchen to the corral ended abruptly, a bread loaf left half-baked, and the family dog pacing anxiously by the back door. The atmosphere was tense, as if the very air had absorbed the fear of absence. Every creaking floorboard or whisper of wind became a potential sign of movement. Children whispered to each other of a shadow passing their windows, though no adult would confirm seeing anything. The sense of unease was tangible. The settlement itself seemed to pause, holding its breath in the icy morning. Days later, another woman, Abigail, vanished while fetching water from the river. Witnesses described faint sounds of distress carried across the frozen plains, though the source could not be traced. Investigators found her bucket abandoned on the riverbank, water sloshing gently, with no sign of struggle beyond disturbed snow. Neighbors speculated wildly. Had she wandered too far? Had she been hidden intentionally? Or had something more sinister occurred? Her children returned home to empty rooms, the smell of oatmeal still lingering in the kitchen, a silent testament to her abrupt absence. The community began to understand that this was no random occurrence. A pattern was emerging that connected labor, secrecy, and disappearance. Shadows were no longer merely shadows, they were the unknown, the invisible force that could claim someone without warning. Meanwhile, in a remote cabin, Eliza, another secret wife, experienced a near-tragic accident. She had been confined in a small room to conceal her presence from visiting neighbors. While moving a crate of firewood, she slipped on frost-covered floorboards and fell heavily, her head striking a rough wooden beam. The thud reverberated through the small cabin, but outside, the neighbors heard nothing. Eliza's cries were muffled by the walls, the cold preventing her from seeking immediate help. Days passed before her condition was discovered, her husband claiming she had been ill and keeping her from public view. The incident sparked whispered discussion about the risks inherent in hiding individuals, and the community realized the physical dangers compounded the social and psychological pressures. Every hidden life was not only socially precarious but materially unsafe, a fact that magnified the tension of each subsequent disappearance. In another incident, Sarah, a young mother, had been hiding in a loft above her husband's home. While attempting to descend quietly to prepare food for the children, she misjudged the ladder and fell, slicing her hand on a protruding nail and scraping her arm along the rough wall. Her scream was faint and brief, heard only by the children below. Panic ensued. They tried to comfort her, but the fear of discovery prevented anyone from alerting the adults immediately. Her injuries, though minor, became a symbol of the hazards of concealment. The very act of existing in secrecy placed her in direct danger, and every household in the settlement began to recognize that concealment carried a weight beyond moral or social implications. The physicality of danger merged seamlessly with the psychological tension that had been building for months. There were other, more violent incidents. One woman, hidden in a distant cabin to prevent her husband's rivals from discovering multiple marriages, was accidentally struck by a falling axe. The instrument had been leaning precariously against a wall, and during a routine movement, it toppled with fatal consequences. The neighbors who discovered the scene were stricken, unable to fully comprehend how an accident could occur within such a controlled environment. Shock and fear spread, emphasizing the peril inherent in secrecy. Families realized that maintaining hidden lives was not only morally and socially complex, but also physically dangerous. Every creak, every movement, every misstep became a potential hazard, heightening the tension in every home. In yet another case, a woman named Esther had been confined within a cellar beneath her husband's house. She attempted to retrieve food stored in barrels, but the uneven ground caused her to trip and fall. The fall, while not lethal, left her trapped temporarily, struggling to free herself from the cramped space. The children, sensing her absence, alerted a neighbor who cautiously investigated. This incident revealed not only the danger of isolation, but also the reliance of hidden women on clandestine support networks. The settlement began to recognize the intricate balance between concealment and care. Those who were hidden required vigilance, yet that very vigilance increased the likelihood of discovery and anxiety. As these incidents accumulated, the community began documenting patterns. Windows left ajar, doors slightly unlocked, misplaced items, all signs that hinted at secretive movements or hurried departures. Observers reported shadows flitting past in the night, voices calling softly from unoccupied rooms, and footsteps echoing along corridors long after inhabitants had retired. The psychological effect was profound. Residents experienced heightened anxiety, sleep disruption, and hypervigilance. Conversations were tempered with caution, and a pervasive sense of dread filled the air. Every household had become a stage for suspense, a theater where the missing wives were both protagonists and ghosts, shaping perception and behavior even in their absence. Incidents were not limited to accidents. Some disappearances suggested deliberate concealment or coercion. Women were reportedly hidden in lofts, cellars, or remote cabins for extended periods. Their daily existence was dictated by fear of discovery, obedience to household hierarchy, and the necessity of survival. The stress of prolonged confinement produced fainting, illness, and psychological strain. Husbands and neighbors struggled to interpret signs. Was a sudden illness merely medical, or the consequence of stress, isolation, or coercion? Rumors circulated that some women had been moved secretly between households, creating an intricate web of concealment and uncertainty. The settlement's social structure became both a tool for hiding and a source of terror, illustrating how secrecy could dominate life and shape community dynamics. Children bore witness to many of these incidents. Some observed fleeting shadows, others heard whispered instructions from parents attempting to control the narrative. Their play was constrained, their movements monitored, and the fear of seeing too much became part of daily life. Even the most ordinary acts, carrying water, tending animals, visiting neighbors, became charged with tension. A misstep could reveal a hidden life. An absence could generate suspicion, and every sound could be interpreted as evidence. The frontier, which had once symbolized opportunity and freedom, transformed into a landscape of surveillance, anxiety, and moral complexity. The cumulative effect of these incidents was to create a community perpetually on edge. Each fall, accident, or sudden disappearance was a reminder of the precarious balance between secrecy and exposure. The settlements became attuned to the faintest signals of disturbance: a creak, a shadow, a muffled cry. Even routine domestic activities were fraught with potential peril. The missing secret wives were no longer simply hidden individuals. They were catalysts for fear, shaping the psychology and behavior of entire communities. Their absences revealed the tension between authority, survival, and the hidden lives that existed just beyond the line of sight, leaving residents trapped in a perpetual state of anticipation and dread. As the disappearances continued, the settlement shifted from quiet unease to open speculation, though no one spoke freely about the secrets that governed their lives. Families reacted in varied ways. Some clutched their children tightly, fearing that any movement could attract the unseen forces taking the missing wives. Others convened in hushed gatherings, exchanging fragments of rumors, trying to piece together explanations that balanced belief, morality, and fear. Anxiety permeated every home, and the air itself seemed charged with anticipation, as if the landscape held its own silent judgment over each household. Neighbors, who had once passed each other with casual familiarity, now observed from doorways and windows, scrutinizing every action. Small mistakes, a door left ajar, a shadow glimpsed moving along a hallway, or the sound of hurried footsteps became evidence to be interpreted, discussed, and often exaggerated. Whispered conversations speculated on hidden motives, unseen punishments, and clandestine arrangements. Some insisted that husbands were responsible, secretly moving or confining their wives. Others believed that the women themselves had orchestrated disappearances, a theory that both absolved men and intensified suspicion of female agency. The settlement became a theater of perception, each household interpreting events through a lens of fear, secrecy, and moral ambiguity. Religious leaders, aware of the social and moral upheaval, intervened cautiously. Pastors and elders emphasized obedience and discretion, counseling families to maintain faith and uphold social order, while carefully avoiding accusations that could fracture the fragile community. Sermons were tinged with warnings, the consequences of disobedience, the dangers of secrecy, and the importance of vigilance. Moral guidance intersected with practical counsel. Men were instructed to manage households responsibly, women to preserve virtue and discretion, and neighbors to observe without judgment. These instructions, however, often heightened tension, reinforcing the notion that observation was necessary yet perilous, and that the balance between community cohesion and individual safety was precarious. Doctors and midwives, limited in both knowledge and resources, offered medical and psychological guidance. Physical injuries resulting from falls, hidden confinement, or accidents were treated with rudimentary remedies, poultices, bandages, and careful observation. But the psychological effects, fear, stress, fainting, anxiety, were less understood. Illness or nervous collapse could be interpreted as divine punishment, weakness, or the result of social transgression. Families navigated this uncertainty cautiously, wary of overstepping moral bounds, yet desperate to protect those remaining. The intersection of limited medical knowledge, social expectation, and secrecy created a complex environment where even legitimate care risked exposure or misinterpretation. Local newspapers, though sparse, reported selectively on unusual occurrences. Articles often framed disappearances in moralistic language, emphasizing divine warning, social propriety, or cautionary tales for settlers. Sensationalized accounts circulated among neighboring settlements, amplifying fear and speculation. Headlines hinted at mysterious vanishings or domestic secrets revealed, while details were vague, leaving gaps filled by rumor. Letters sent between families and friends carried stories of lost wives, shadowy figures, and unexplained absences, perpetuating the sense that the entire region was under the sway of forces both human and unknown. Even distant observers speculated on the causes, linking secrecy, polygamy, and frontier isolation to the unsettling pattern of vanishings. Psychologically, the settlement was caught in a feedback loop of observation and fear. Children learned to monitor adults, adults monitored each other, and the missing wives themselves became central figures in a communal imagination. Sleep was disturbed, chores became ritualized acts of vigilance, and even casual social interactions were infused with suspicion. The very act of communication, letters, whispered conversation, instructions carried potential danger if misinterpreted. As a result, daily life was punctuated by hyper-awareness, with every gesture and sound analyzed for clues or warnings. The absent women, though invisible, exerted profound influence over thought, behavior, and emotion throughout the community. Families directly affected by disappearances experienced acute distress. Husbands faced social scrutiny while managing hidden or absent wives. Children were left without guidance or comfort, and remaining wives navigated fear for their own safety. Emotional strain manifested in tension, irritability, and, in some cases, illness. Communities observed these dynamics closely, interpreting them as both social signals and moral lessons. Collective response ranged from protective measures to subtle ostracism, as neighbors sought to manage risk while adhering to norms of discretion and propriety. Trust, once implicit, became conditional, dependent on observation, reputation, and careful maintenance of appearances. The interplay of secrecy and authority influenced judicial and communal mechanisms. When disputes arose over property, marriage legitimacy, or disappearance, resolution often depended on reputation, testimony, and social standing rather than codified law. Elders and influential families held sway over interpretations, often reinforcing secrecy to preserve social stability. The law, constrained by geographic isolation and limited enforcement, offered little recourse, leaving families to navigate moral and practical dilemmas largely on their own. This environment magnified the consequences of every absence and disappearance, creating a society where visibility and invisibility were intertwined with survival and social cohesion. Community rituals, church meetings, shared meals, and labor gatherings were imbued with tension. Women and men alike engaged in careful observation during these events, reading expressions, monitoring interactions, and inferring relationships. Even routine labor, such as hauling water or tending livestock, became an act of scrutiny, as movement itself could reveal hidden arrangements. The missing secret wives were at the center of this social theater, their absence giving meaning and urgency to otherwise ordinary activities. The frontier, though open and expansive, became psychologically constricted, with the unseen exerting influence over every aspect of life. Cultural and religious beliefs compounded the interpretive challenge. Supernatural explanations, divine punishment, and moral causality were commonly invoked to explain disappearances or unusual occurrences. Some community members genuinely believed that hidden lives attracted spiritual consequences. Others were pragmatic, attributing absences to practical concealment or intentional secrecy. This coexistence of rational and supernatural interpretation created layers of ambiguity, allowing fear to thrive in spaces where evidence was scarce. The psychological environment was therefore as complex as the physical one. Observation, imagination, and belief merged to create a climate of anxiety, speculation, and moral uncertainty. By the end of the first year, the settlement had internalized the presence of the missing wives in both conscious and subconscious ways. Conversations, routines, and social hierarchies had been reshaped to accommodate absence and secrecy. Newcomers were educated through subtle observation and direct instruction to respect boundaries, avoid intrusive inquiry, and participate in communal vigilance. The missing secret wives, though often unseen, had become central to the settlement's moral and psychological framework, illustrating how individual events could ripple across an entire community, shaping norms, behavior, and perception in lasting ways. The long months of disappearance and fear culminated one harsh winter night, when the settlement was blanketed in snow and silence. The wind cut sharply across the frozen plains, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the subtle metallic tang of fear. Inside the houses, families huddled by their hearths, the flickering light casting shadows that danced along walls, reminding them of the countless unseen presences. That night, a particularly tense hush settled over the community, heavier than usual, as if the land itself was holding its breath in anticipation of revelation. Eliza, the young wife who had first vanished in secrecy, became the focal point of this tension. She had been hidden in a small loft, moving silently to avoid detection while tending to her children. The snow outside muffled the sound of movement, turning every creak and groan of the building into an ominous signal. Her husband, attempting to ensure her concealment, moved about with unusual caution, adjusting blankets and securing doors. Yet despite meticulous care, a sudden noise, a floorboard groaning under the weight of an unnoticed step, set a chain of events into motion that neither he nor the neighbors could have anticipated. Across the settlement, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Neighbors began to notice subtle movements in shadows, a curtain fluttering without wind, faint silhouettes at windows, doors opening and closing with no explanation. The snow had rendered the usual paths invisible, so every step carried uncertainty. Families whispered warnings to children, instructing them to remain quiet and stay within sight, their voices trembling despite the calm tone. The entire community seemed poised at the edge of observation and fear, with everyone aware that the hidden wives were simultaneously present and absent, shaping perception through mere suggestion. In one home, a sudden commotion erupted. Martha, previously hidden within the kitchen, slipped while attempting to retrieve supplies from a low shelf. Her fall was muffled by the thick rug, but the sound was unmistakable in the eerie stillness. Children froze, neighbors strained to hear, and the husband's face turned pale with fear of discovery. He moved quickly to silence and comfort, realizing that even a minor incident could expose the carefully maintained secret. Every creak of a floorboard, every displaced object became a potential revelation, intensifying the already heightened tension. Meanwhile, outside, faint cries were carried across the snow-laden fields. Abigail, who had disappeared earlier while fetching water, had attempted to make her way to a distant neighbor's cabin to seek help. The cold, treacherous ground made each step precarious. Snow clung to her clothing, muffling her movement yet amplifying the peril. Observers, hearing only faint sounds, struggled to discern whether it was wind or human presence. The uncertainty, amplified by darkness and isolation, generated panic, confusion, and speculation across the settlement. No one knew whether to intervene or remain hidden, whether the noise signaled danger or relief. Eliza's movement, Abigail's cries, and the minor accidents occurring simultaneously across the settlement converged to create an atmosphere thick with tension. Families imagined unseen threats lurking behind walls, within lofts and beyond fences. Shadows were misinterpreted as figures, sounds carried exaggerated meaning. Every moment demanded vigilance. The psychological strain, a product of months of secrecy and fear, reached a critical point. Adults and children alike were trapped between the instinct to investigate and the fear of discovery. Every decision weighted by the consequences of revealing what had long remained hidden. In the loft, Eliza attempted to descend quickly to check on her children. The latter trembled under her weight, her gloved hands slipping against frost-dusted rungs. A loud crack resonated through the wooden structure, startling those below and sending the children into fearful cries. The neighbors, now fully alert to the disturbances, peered through windows and doorways, unsure of what they would find. Husbands, aware that exposure could ruin reputations or provoke legal and social consequences, moved with care yet faced the unavoidable reality that concealment had limits. The line between hidden and revealed, safety and danger, was razor thin. Simultaneously, in another household, Sarah attempted to move quietly to tend to a fire. Her foot caught on a loose plank, and she fell heavily, knocking over a small cabinet. The sound reverberated throughout the empty room and into the hallway, eliciting gasps from the children nearby. The husband rushed to assess the situation, dread written on his face, realizing that multiple small incidents had converged into a singular, overwhelming event. Across the settlement, similar minor accidents and movements created a ripple effect, amplifying fear and anticipation. The community collectively felt the tension, as if each house were a note in a crescendo building toward inevitable revelation. The climax reached its most intense point when Esther, trapped in the cellar beneath her husband's home, attempted to ascend unnoticed. The stairs were narrow and uneven, and her foot slipped, sending her tumbling back into the darkness below. The cry that escaped her lips was faint, yet piercing in the quiet of the night, echoing through the walls and across the snow-covered ground. Those within earshot were paralyzed with fear. What should they do? And how could they intervene without exposing both themselves and the hidden wives? The psychological terror was mirrored by the physical risk, creating a moment where fear, secrecy, and danger collided with absolute clarity. In every home, shadows became figures, footsteps became threats, and silence became unbearable. Families strained to interpret each sound, each movement, and each glimpse of light. The missing secret wives were at once invisible and omnipresent, their presence dictating the behavior, emotion, and thought of the entire settlement. The night became a theater of suspense, with every individual a performer in a drama orchestrated by absence and fear. The tension was almost tangible, pressing against walls, filling hallways, and lingering in every glance exchanged between neighbors. By dawn, the settlement was exhausted. Physical strain, emotional tension, and psychological terror had converged into a collective sense of relief tinged with lingering dread. The immediate incidents had passed, yet the awareness that hidden lives remained concealed and that any moment could bring further crisis lingered. The community emerged from the night changed, acutely conscious of the fragility of order, the power of secrecy, and the ever-present risk of exposure. The missing secret wives had asserted their influence not through presence, but through the fear, tension, and vigilance they inspired. This night marked the climax of the ongoing drama, a convergence of accidents, concealment, and communal anxiety that revealed the profound consequences of secrecy, social hierarchy, and isolation. It demonstrated that in the harsh environment of 1859 Utah, the frontier was not merely a place of physical survival, but a stage for psychological and social tension, where absence and hidden lives could dominate entire communities, leaving indelible marks on behavior, relationships, and collective consciousness. As the seasons shifted and the snow melted into spring, the settlement returned outwardly to routine. Yet the shadow of the missing secret wives lingered persistently. Families resumed labor, children returned to school, and church gatherings once again filled the meeting houses with familiar voices, but beneath the surface, the collective memory of the incidents remained alive. Conversations were quieter, gestures more deliberate, and eyes more attentive to subtle shifts in movement. The absence of resolution, the knowledge that hidden lives still existed beyond the reach of observation, cast a persistent pall over daily life. Speculation thrived in whispers and private reflection. Did the hidden wives survive the harsh winter in secrecy? Had some found permanent refuge in distant cabins, or were they casualties of accidents and isolation? The truth was partially obscured by necessity. The concealment that had ensured secrecy during the winter months made verification impossible. Families and neighbors relied on incomplete information, memory, and rumor, constructing narratives that balanced fear, hope, and moral interpretation. The unknown became a mirror, reflecting not only the risks of frontier life, but also the human capacity to imagine, fear, and project meaning onto the unseen. The psychological impact on those who remained visible was profound. Husbands, tasked with the care and concealment of multiple households, continued to navigate a precarious balance between authority, secrecy, and social expectation. Children carried the memory of shadows, muffled cries, and whispered instructions into adulthood, internalizing lessons of vigilance, discretion, and the unseen consequences of absence. The settlement, while outwardly functional, was psychologically transformed. Every gesture, every glance, and every absence held latent significance, a reminder that life and presence were often inseparable from secrecy and risk. Socially, the events became a cautionary tale, shaping norms and expectations for years to come. New settlers were subtly educated in the art of concealment, discretion, and the navigation of complex household arrangements. Elders imparted warnings, not just of practical danger, but of the moral and psychological consequences of exposure. Polygamy, secrecy, and the management of hidden wives remained a sensitive topic, layered with moral, legal, and spiritual tension. The missing secret wives, though absent from daily view, remained central to communal understanding of authority, survival, and human vulnerability. Culturally, the incidents reinforced the power of rumor, observation, and imagination. Shadows were as real as figures, whispered warnings as consequential as spoken commands, and absence carried as much weight as presence. Stories of near accidents, hidden lives, and narrow escapes circulated in hushed tones, shaping collective memory and guiding behavior. The very landscape, the lofts, cellars, remote cabins, and snow-covered plains became part of the narrative, a silent participant in the drama. The environment itself, intertwined with human action and secrecy, maintained an aura of suspense and unease long after the immediate crises passed. Reflecting on these events from a modern perspective, the missing secret wives illuminate the interplay of isolation, secrecy, authority, and human psychology in frontier societies. The dangers of concealment were not merely physical. They encompassed moral ambiguity, social surveillance, and emotional strain. The settlement's collective memory demonstrates how fear and secrecy can shape social structures, relationships, and individual perception. Even decades later, the stories serve as both historical record and cautionary narrative, revealing the intricate and sometimes perilous dance between visibility, absence, and human intention. The mystery of their ultimate fates remains unresolved. Some may have survived, living hidden lives unknown to most, perhaps moving on to distant regions or quietly reintegrating into the community. Others may have succumbed to accidents, illness, or the harsh conditions that accompanied enforced secrecy. Regardless, their presence or absence continues to resonate. The psychological and social imprint they left endures, a reminder of how hidden lives can exert profound influence over visible communities, shaping thought, behavior, and collective memory in ways that are simultaneously tangible and enigmatic. In closing, the story of the missing secret wives of 1859. Utah is a testament to the fragility of human life, the weight of secrecy, and the enduring impact of absence. It invites reflection on the intersection of survival, morality, and social expectation in a world shaped by isolation, labor, and strict cultural norms. The echoes of their existence persist in the shadows of memory, the contours of landscape, and the collective imagination of a community that learned, sometimes painfully, that what is unseen can wield as much power as what is seen. The frontier, with its vast open spaces and hidden corners, remains both a physical and psychological terrain where stories of fear, resilience, and mystery continue to unfold, leaving us to ponder the lives that vanished into the silence and the lessons that silence imparts.